Good evening and welcome to this special program live from Melbourne, reporting on the terror attack at the Adass Israel synagogue, a synagogue that went from this lively, busy place of community and prayer to this. A place of worship so violently destroyed, decimated and desecrated. I saw this for myself today when I was invited to walk through that shocking scene, and when I spoke with the worshipper who survived but so easily could have been killed. I felt compelled to witness this and report on it, to bring you the full horror of this attack and to reflect on the visceral impact it's had on all right-thinking Australians, regardless of our faith or race. Sadly, shockingly, these pictures show you what anti-Semitism means. This is the hunting of Jews by arsonists, potentially with murder in their minds and hatred in their hearts, right here in Melbourne, Australia in 2024. Now, I'll bring you my full report from the synagogue in a moment. But make no mistake, this is the worst attack on a place of worship in Australia in recent history, with police today officially declaring it a terrorist attack. And the Prime Minister was today forced into action, embarrassed into action. And he announced a special task force to investigate incidents of anti-Semitism. Yet, Albanese still hasn't visited the Adass synagogue. Neither has his Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke or any senior cabinet minister, apart from outgoing rival Bill Shorten. Now, if this were a mosque, you can bet Albanese and Burke would have been there mere hours after it happened. Yet, true to form, we saw Albanese government ministers speaking about Islamophobia today.
He said that that Islamophobia shouldn't be mentioned in the same sentence as the Prime Minister has done. If James Patterson thinks there's no Islamophobia in Australia, he's wrong.
He didn't say that, though. He said that when something happens, it should be enough to just denounce anti-Semitism.
He went on to say that they're not at the same levels. Look, but the point of the matter is...
Hang on a minute, are you saying they are at the same levels? Because we've just seen a targeted attack on a synagogue.
I'm saying, Patricia, that both exist, and I'm saying that both can be called out.
But there's no Islamophobia crisis, and this is not a mosque, it's a synagogue. It's Jewish people who are being targeted. But this doesn't fit Albanese's preferred narrative of Palestinians being the victims. That's what he's argued throughout his parliamentary career. It's why he's failed to meet the moment as this anti-Semitism crisis erupted. He has not risen to the occasion of being Prime Minister, where he's obligated to protect all Australians. Yet he's allowed one minority group, Jews, to be persecuted. The problem is we literally have pro-Palestinian activists in charge of fixing anti-Semitism in our country. Now, remember, this was Albanese from early in his political career, but he was already a federal MP in Canberra.
The response of Israel has been to meet children throwing rocks with helicopter gunships, with tanks and with missiles.
And this activism continued throughout Albanese's time in Parliament. In 2017, just 2 years before Albanese became opposition leader, he and Tony Burke had a policy forum on Palestine with special guest, fellow pro-Palestinian activist Bob Carr. But here's my point. Can you imagine putting the current anti-Semitism crisis in the hands of one of the protesters? You'd simply never do it. Yet that's what we have here with Albanese and Tony Burke. It's like having the fox in charge of the hen house. Our safety has been categorically put at risk by this government's lack of action on anti-Semitism. And how can the Prime Minister claim with a straight face, as he did on the weekend, that he's done all he can on anti-Semitism? On the contrary, Albanese and Penny Wong have only emboldened the haters. Their moral confusion has encouraged the Israel haters and has allowed anti-Semitism to fester. They've wrongly demonised Israel and thus made Jews a target. Because in the minds of the haters, Jews are inseparable from Israel because Israel is the Jewish homeland. Watching the anti-Semitism that was erupting, the Albanese government had a responsibility not to fix the Middle East war, but to ensure that all Australians were safe and protected. Instead, they tried to adjudicate the war. Penny Wong should have said, Israel has a right, a duty to defend itself, and it needs to bring its hostages home. She should have said that any nation would do the same. And if she had a criticism, she could have made it in private, knowing how public provocative language could inflame tensions here. But she dangerously chose not to do that. The Prime Minister has been very slow to acknowledge there's an anti-Semitism issue, and he probably wouldn't be acting at all if he hadn't been forced into it, with accusations that he's been missing in action literally blasted across the front page of the newspaper. Well, after 4 days of us all watching on in bewilderment at his apparent lack of interest in the fact a synagogue had burnt down, the Prime Minister finally held a press conference today with the AFP, ASIO and Attorney General. But if it weren't for the media and the principled stand taken by Peter Dutton, James Patterson, Josh Frydenberg and the Jewish community leaders, well, it's unlikely Albanese would have announced this today.
Today I can also announce that we have established AFP Special Operation Avalite for anti-Semitism. This is in response to the attack last Friday morning that is now the third arson attack after the attack on Josh Byrne's electorate office and the Sydney Woollahra car incident.
And yet he still hasn't visited the site of what is now officially a declared terrorist incident. Well, like me, Peter Dutton was there today. He walked through the synagogue and he found it emotional.
To see the half-burnt books, the scriptures, and the devastation to a place that otherwise is peaceful and allows people to practice their faith and to share each other's company, to be disrupted in that way is a horrible thing to see.
It's quite emotional seeing it, isn't it?
It is actually, yes. Yeah, I think when you see, and it's not just the sight, it's the smell as well, the stench of the fire, and you can see where people, young children, others had been sitting is entirely predictable. As you've reported, to your great credit, on our university campuses and in our streets, people have been crossing red lines for the last 13 months. They've acted with gross indecency, and now, of course, it's culminated in this terrorist attack, and nobody should be surprised by that. And we need to work out how we can quickly resolve these issues so that the next terrorist attack doesn't take place.
Well, I asked Peter Dutton if Albanese should turn up, but instead, Albanese played tennis over the weekend. Action on anti-Semitism, Dutton said, should have been taken 14 months ago. Peter, you've been here, you've shown the leadership to actually come and visit. The Prime Minister hasn't, and we've just found out, it's just been reported, that he took time out to play tennis instead of dealing with this issue over the weekend. What's your response to the fact that he went in and played tennis literally while a synagogue was burning?
Well, I think it's really a story of the last 13 months, and when we saw those horrible circumstances and protests on the steps of the Sydney Opera House, that was really the time when the Prime Minister had to step up, because that would have sent a clear message that we had no tolerance for the anti-Semitic conduct and the blatant racism that was on display that night. But it's just compounded since then. And so, as I say, nobody should be surprised that it's culminated in a terrorist event, and I think the Prime Minister can tell you about his own position and why the government's taken a position which I think is incomprehensible to most right-thinking Australians.
You think he should come visit?
I think he should come visit, and I think it would be the respectful thing to do.
Well, as Peter Dutton says, the anti-Semitism crisis should never have come to this. Penny Wong and Albanese need to be strongly reminded of exactly what their jobs are. Their role is to govern for Australia. It's not to interfere in foreign wars. It's not to tell a sovereign nation how to act when it comes under attack with its civilians killed and kidnapped in an unprovoked act of terror. Albanese leads the Australian government, not the Palestinian government. His most basic requirement in office is to provide a safe environment for all of us in Australia. Yet he's disgracefully failed to do this. Let's hope today is the start of proper leadership, and yet somehow I doubt it.